Today we're going to talk about this amazing last kind of 10 years, which is the focus here of the exhibition. But before that, I thought it would be kind of interesting to begin with the beginnings and talk a little bit about how it all started. Somehow, obviously, we won't have time. I promise that it will not be a marathon, so we won't be here all night long, so that we can somehow, do the conversation in an hour. It will be necessary to focus on the key moments of your epiphany. So to begin sort of with the first epiphany, I was wondering how it all started, how you came to art, how art came to you, if there was a sudden awakening, if you can maybe tell us how it all began.
I'm not speaking because it started before I learned how to talk. My brother and sister were quite a bit older than me, so I was alone a lot. My parents were quite a bit older than me also, so I just started painting when I was quite small. And then there was one of these in Life magazine or something, there was a how to draw school in Westport, Connecticut, a famous artist school or something like that, and it said, if your son or daughter can draw this, maybe they're an artist. And it was a horse's head in a paddock, and I drew it, and I guess my mother thought I had some talent. So even though she didn't know anything about art, she used to take me to museums. And I guess one epiphany I had was when I saw Rembrandt's painting, Aristotle contemplating the bust of Homer. I saw that painting, I must have been 6 years old or something like that, and I thought, that looks like a good thing to do. And I guess that's when it started.
And another kind of beginning is obviously the beginning of the Catalogue Raisonné, and I spoke the other day to Gerhard Richter, who said, everything was student work, and then he started to number the number one in the Catalogue Raisonné when he had the famous painting of that blurred table. And I was wondering, we were looking at this book, Draw a Family, before, which is an amazing, almost like an artist book. It's a book without text, just of your paintings. Where would your Catalogue Raisonné start? What's the number one entry in your Catalogue Raisonné? What's the first work you considered somehow valid and no longer student work?
Well, I wonder if it's in here. I made some paintings in the early 70s that were, maybe they were my first New York paintings in a way. But I don't think that, and maybe they look better now than they looked then to me, just because I have more distance from them. But there's a painting here called Jack the Bellboy. It was a painting, not that you can see it, but it was painted in 1975, and at that time, I'd been living in New York since '73, and I moved back to Texas, and I was standing near a bar called Jack's Nest near the docks in Galveston, and there was a door on this bar that had a couple of holes kind of gouged out of it, and they were repaired with plaster. And for me, I felt like I arrived back in New York City at a time when, people have been talking about the end of painting since the beginning of time. But as they continued doing that, at a certain moment, I think people felt like Bryce Marden was painting the last paintings, and under the wax of those gray paintings, all history was sort of buried. Maybe that's a very literal interpretation, but when I showed up, I felt like I could reintroduce language into painting, things that Clement Greenberg and some other formalists sort of felt were, extra to the essence of what painting was about, but I felt like it wasn't. And my particular needs as a young person, included things that were not obsolete or that these other people deemed obsolete. So I thought if I could start with a panel of meaning, then I could reintroduce language into painting. And so my first notion was that I'd build a wall, and the wall could be the support for whatever I wanted to put on it. And then there was a difference between the architecture of the painting, what the body of the painting was, and what was pictorial that was drawn onto the painting. And I think in that painting, Jack the Bellboy, I cut some holes out of it and I built these little bumps. I was using Roplex, which is a kind of glue, and I mixed it with joint compound, and I was making my own kind of modeling paste. And it started out on a stretcher and a canvas that looked like canvas and wood, but when I got done with it, it looked like the door at Jack's nest. Also looked like there were marks on it that looked like somebody was in prison, marking the days of their incarceration. From that point, I realized that what my interest was the conflict in between what was pictorial and what was physical. And that conflict, or that battle between those two things, was the space where my work resided. And so when I made the first broken dish paintings, I was looking for a surface that would be a new kind of, something I hadn't seen before, and a new kind of molecular structure. But not being an abstract expressionist, I didn't just say, okay, that's my signature or that's my irreducible image. I thought it was something to paint on. And then as I worked on those paintings, I was seeing the different kinds of images that could be different plate paintings. There are no plate paintings in this exhibition, but the notion of, at a certain moment I realized that something that was pictorial could be architectural also. So I started to print things that were already pictures, mostly things that had been paintings that I could turn back into paintings by rephotographing them and printing them, and then on polyester, and then that was the architecture of the picture, and then I could react to it any way that I wanted to.
And it's actually more or less, I think it was in that first meeting we had, I was wondering also what I asked you when I met you, as a teenager at that opening in Bischofsberg, and we had that sort of 10-minute chat. And I remember it was about the plate paintings and sort of how you did that first exhibition in the late 70s in New York. And it's kind of interesting when one talks to scientists. I mean, I remember some years ago I spoke to Albert Hoffman, who discovered LSD. He remembered exactly the hour almost when, as a kind of a chance find in his lab, he discovered LSD. And the same for Benoit Mandelbrot. He remembered the minute he would discover fractals, in his lab. I was kind of interested in terms of these very, very well-known plate paintings, if you remember the day when you made the invention, and how does such an invention occur?
Well, I was in Barcelona, and I went to the Parc Güell, and I saw Gaudi's. There was a big park, and it had a dirt floor, and there were ceramics that were very decorative, that were the banquettes that went around the park. And I thought, I liked looking at the dirt, and I liked looking at these ceramics, but they were very colorful. So I went to this really crummy restaurant, and they had a terrible mosaic that was essentially white there. And I thought, I think I could get some dishes, some broken plates, and make another kind of mosaic, break up the surface in some way. And I went back to my hotel room, and it was about as, from there, I went kind of in between these two things, from there to here, about that big. But the closet came out into the room in a very nice anthropomorphic size that seemed like you could stretch your arms a certain distance. It was 8 by 9 feet, more or less, came out into the room a foot, and then so I thought, okay, I'll get somebody to build me an armature like that in New York. So I made 2 paintings. One was called The Patients and the Doctors, Another one was called The Death of Fashion. One of them, one panel came out in an asymmetrical way. The other one was in the center. And I didn't really know, first of all, you couldn't make a drawing of these things. It just absolutely looked absurd to try to draw what that is, so I thought it could be a painting. And when I came home, it was in the summer, I went to the Salvation Army, and they hire disabled people. There was a midget who was working there, and we were loading all of these plates into this big box, and he couldn't get his arms over the box. So I said, just drop them, it's okay, I'm going to break them anyway. So we did. And we just broke all these plates at the Salvation Army, and I took them home, and I didn't know how to really, what kind of glue I needed, so I used dental plaster, auto body putty, any kind of glue that I could find, and glued the plates down on the floor, and then stood the painting up because I was impatient to see what it would look like. Well, in the middle of the night, I was hearing this rain of plates. I figured whatever was still on the surface would be part of the painting. There's probably a date on that, but I'd say that that happened in September of 1978.
Now it's kind of fascinating because obviously these works then, become so widely exhibited and shown all over the world. I mean, I remember, at the beginning when I visited the exhibition to see them in so many museums in France and Germany. I think there was also early on a show in London. Somehow my neighbor in Paris at that time, Raymond, he always talked about this idea that in art there can be personified abstraction. So, once an artist discovers something like Yves Klein's blue, he does it for the rest of his life. But then obviously there is the Picabia thing, which is the opposite, where Picabia would say, our head is round-shaped, and because it's round-shaped, we can change direction. You're more from that Picabia logic. You didn't, just for the rest of your trajectory, continue to make clay paintings. You made many, many different other series. I was wondering, having invented this plate series, what was the next epiphany? How could you then invent the next thing?
I see paintings everywhere. Some people see cars, some people see money, some people see trees. I don't know. I just see paintings or possibilities for paintings. And I was thinking about actually, putting color down or thinking about color, and I was looking at velvet, and I thought, is that painting crooked now, or is it just the people that are there that make it look crooked? Is it crooked, Vito? I don't know. Okay. Anyway, okay, huh? It's my glasses. Okay. So anyway, I looked at these kinds of velvet that were, and I thought that the colors were so saturated and they were so unusual. I started to get big rolls of velvet and have the scenes sewed together, and I made some paintings on velvet. And then at the same time, I started thinking about, there was one panel that didn't have any plates on it yet, a painting called Exile, and so I took some antlers, and I attached the antlers to that panel, and then I painted some images. I painted it gold, the surface, and I painted some images on that. And then I guess I painted on rug batting, the brown stuff that you put underneath rugs. I liked the way that looked, and there was gray rug batting, and then there was a kind of burnt sienna rug batting, and then I started painting on rugs, and I started painting on cushions, and because I thought that the plates were paintings, these armatures, they looked like furniture already. It was like I hung the closet on the wall, and it was covered with plates. So there was whatever to suspend some kind of, I painted on linoleum, we could look through this book, and I guess I paint on a lot of different things. Corrugated tin, and I cast paintings in aluminum. I was just looking for another surface or another way, another thing to paint on. I was also looking for different ways to paint, to put paint down. So sometimes you just see things lying around in your studio. I mean, first of all, you know, at art school, I imagine some of you are in art school here, and everybody was always complaining that they have no room to work. I paint outside. I've been painting outside since 1979, and even though the paintings used to fall over and get grass and the wax and things like that, you know, you sort of accept that as part of the nature, as part of nature, actually. And, or leaving canvases outside, there was mildew that would rise if I left the stuff in a pile. So I started drawing in what I was seeing in the mildew. I liked working outside, so rain started being a part of my process. Or if I used a hose, since I was working outside, I'd put things down, and say the hose was laying in some white gesso. All of a sudden I saw that it made an impression on the floor, so I took the hose like a lasso and hit the painting with it, and I'd end up with a drawing quite quickly. Or I ended up taking canvases and folding them in a way and tying them behind my Jeep, and then I drive the Jeep on the highway, and the highway's made out of petroleum, so basically the asphalt is paint, and if you go over at a certain speed, there was an imprint. So I had a picture that was 15 feet square that looked like the Eiger Nordwand in about 5 minutes. And so I was looking for a way to make a bigger mark, a bigger stroke, I guess, started with plastic, and then I started taking a tablecloth and dipping it in paint and throwing it at the canvas. I didn't have a preconception of what the image would look like. But I guess, obviously what I'm saying here is that the process and the selection of materials and the way of trying to put paint on it has a lot to do with the meaning of whatever I'm doing. We didn't get to talk about these pictures yet, but you're asking me for my epiphanies.
We speak about all of the pictures here in a second, but before that, I wanted to kind of ask you about one more thing from the past, but from the more recent past, sort of more late 80s, early 90s, because somehow this idea of you bring in all these materials and bring in all of these sort of hybrid sources is something which is very present in a show I just saw 2 days ago in New York, which is View of Dawn in the Tropics. Your paintings from the very late 80s, very early 90s, many of them are enormous formats, and what you've just been describing, you know, which after the play painting you bring in all these sources, is very present in that show. Can you tell us a little bit about this series?
It's called View of Dawn in the Tropics because I was working down in Florida, and there's a great book by Cabrera Infante with these vignettes about Cuba. I spent a lot of time in Cuba. And that's why it was called View of Dawn in the Tropics. I was working down there, and I was working outside. So the paintings that are in that show, some of them are on army tarps. So the color comes with the material. I'm not painting them green. They're already green. They were used to cover trucks. Sometimes, my father was in the ropa usada business. In Spanish, that means used clothes. So he was involved with all these jobbers that could get 20,000 tons of barbed wire or tires or sunglasses and also army tarps. And so some of the paintings, I made these pictures called the recognition paintings that were in the form of a cross, because the cross is the top and the sides, the flaps that cover the back of the truck. And I thought, why should I make the paintings rectangles if they're already crosses, or sometimes they were irregular shapes, like a painting called The Teddy Bear's Picnic, looked like the 10 Commandments or something. But so I had been making pictures that were painted on white tarps, and I wanted to make some black paintings. And I was driving through Zihuatanejo on the Pacific coast of Mexico, and there was a truck that was broken down. And I looked next to the truck, and it looked like there was an elephant skin next to the truck. And I said to the guy, can I buy that from you? He said, well, how much do you have? It was in my bathing suit. I had $70 on me, but he sold it to me. And it was 17 by 23 feet. And it had been patched probably by his mother-in-law. So I liked all of these patches and the whole history of whatever that was contained in that material. And worked in a vivero, ¿cómo se llama? A nursery, thank you. A plant nursery where I tied the painting, I cut a bamboo tree down and tied it between these two trees, and I would paint what images I was seeing in these. I showed them at Yvon Lambert in, was it 87, 85, something like that. But so one looked like a monster, and then there was another one. They all looked like I saw monsters in them. So I was basically standing in Mexico. I felt like the blood and all the history of whatever happened there was coming up through my body and was going into those paintings. So one painting was called War, there was another one called Apathy, and another one called Consumption. I have two of them still. But it was funny because I'd be leaning on this bamboo tree that was cut with the ladder, and sometimes the wind would blow the canvas further away, and I just have to wait till the wind blew the other way so the canvas would go back. I feel, okay, it's ready for me to put the mark on it. And there were this couple. One guy actually was Trotsky's bodyguard, and he was German, and he was a socialist, and he was involved. He was in Germany before the war, and his girlfriend was Jewish, and he left and came to London. She stayed there and went to Auschwitz, but she survived. She was actually the person that typed Schindler's List. And this guy, Alex Olson, was a book publisher, and he was my neighbor. I figured they knew what war looked like. So I'm out in this nursery painting this painting, and I went to pick them up in a truck. I figured if I was making a painting of war, she would know what it looked like. And when she saw this monster, she said to me, "It looks a little too human." So I painted the eyes red of this sort of, it looked like a chicken's body or an ostrich's body with a head of, kind of a human head on it. Anyway, those pictures kind of gave birth to these paintings that were painted in Florida. And I had been in Egypt going down the Nile and actually bought the felucca sails from the sailors and said I'd get them some new sails and made paintings that were the shapes of, they looked kind of like airplane wings or something, but whatever shape I could fit into that, the largest size, and not to change the scale of that. And so I painted some of those out there, and I painted this painting called Ozymandias out there, and basically there was a man named Robert de Balcony, and he had a very nice big house, but this guy bought his house, and his girlfriend didn't like it, so they knocked his house down. And I came upon it at the time when the house looked like it was in colonial disarray in Egypt. So basically I went back to Egypt, except I was in Florida, and painted those paintings there. And so the show at Larry's has 3 red paintings from 1989, 1990 that are 15 feet square. And there's 12 paintings in the show, but none of them have ever been shown in New York. They've been reproduced, but there's a lot of paintings I made, I just put them away.
But I thought it's kind of interesting because it leads directly to the paintings here, you know, in the exhibition, because there is many kind of points in common. It's this idea that you use a lot of found things, and also the idea of, and that's actually something which is maybe interesting sort of at the beginning when we talk about the show here, is this idea of what is from the very beginning of your work always present, this idea of getting closer and then getting away. It's the reason, you told me before, it's the reason why you often work in unorthodox circumstances. You work outdoors, you work in a plein air situation so that you can go far back. And it's something, the first thing you told me when I arrived and we looked at that most recent painting in the show from 2014 was that. So let's step back. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I believe that the whole purpose of painting, or the way that painting functions, is that it's a very, very different experience that you have when you're close to it and when you get far away from it. Images are different than paintings. And there can even be paintings that are made out of paint, but if they don't change when you get close to them, or something new doesn't happen when you get close to them, they're not very good paintings, probably. I mean, if you look at Caravaggio paintings, there's an image of something. And I think one of the things that kind of put me off at art school was that I was seeing reproductions of paintings, but I wasn't seeing the paintings. And people are talking about something, but it's really just an image of that. So I felt like I needed to go to Italy to look at paintings in the flesh. So I went to see the Giotto Chapel in Padova, or I went to see the Caravaggio paintings in Rome. And when you get up close to these things, there's a totally different reality that occurs. I'd like my paintings to function like that. So you understand something that you're very close to something, and a lot of paintings I make with my fingers. I don't use a brush, but I'm painting them spatially, and they look quite messy up close. I mean, Velázquez looks quite messy up close. So does most really good painters like Goya. But when you get back from them, they then congeal and become an image of something.
Like that painting you showed me at the very entrance here.
It's always about distance. And you know, John Richardson was looking at some of my paintings. We were in New York City, and he just said, you just can't reproduce these things. And I think that's true. I think some work can be reproduced. I don't think my work reproduces very well. I mean, this book is very cute and everything, and very nice. It has a lot of images of things that people can look at. But really, I think you need to stand in front of the thing to see what it does. And for example, if you look at that painting from where we're standing, it looks a certain way. But Hans Ulrich, if you go up close to that, you'll notice that every painted mark has its autonomy in that painting. Why don't we do that for 1 second, because then you can actually say what you think about that. So, you know, we see it like that. When you get up close, you see that this white mark is sitting like it's suspended in space, or this blue mark that's there, or any of these marks. I don't know, it's because this, you know, this resin seems to have this effect on isolating each and making the painted mark seem rounder. When you get back, you kind of see something that looks like a stomach or an intestine or something like that, or whatever. But I think when you get up close to it, there's something about it, there's a kind of equality to all of the parts that material is good for. Anyway, that's just in that particular thing. But in general, I mean, if you ever see the painting of David and Goliath by Caravaggio, when you look at the furrow in his forehead, you'll see he did it in a couple of white marks, and they're quite rough. And then you get back and you look at it, you think, well, obviously the cliche would be, it looks like a photograph. And there's something I like to say now, probably to anybody in this room, that anyone who thinks that Caravaggio used some kind of a lens to make those paintings doesn't know anything, or never ever looked at a Caravaggio painting, and underestimates the talent and the kind of clarity that he had as a painter, because it's obvious that these things are painted from life and they're not painted through a lens, and they had nothing to do with photography. If anybody would like to comment on that, we could talk about that, but we don't need to. What do you think about that?
It's obviously a very important point. It's also why we can kind of return to painting again and again, and why exhibitions are even more urgent than in the age of the internet or ever before. I mean, it's the reason also why you've never really engaged, I suppose, with the internet. But that's later for the conversation.
Yeah, I have a T-shirt that says, "I hate the internet and everybody on it, including myself."
Now, to talk about the exhibition here, because we've talked about, you know, the past, and we've talked about your epiphanies, and entering now the works we see here. I wanted to ask you about the title, because it's interesting that it's about the dark side of every angel, but Spaventoso is kind of more than dark. It's terrifying. Can you tell us about the title and its translations?
Yeah, it really is. Spaventoso means terrifying. It could be dark, shocking is another word, but I wrote it in Italian actually on, there was a group of pictures and it said Ogni angelo il suo lato spaventoso. The only one where it's written in English is in the back, and it says, but it's very vague, you can hardly read what it says, but it says every angel has his terrifying side. I think Nikolai picked the word dark, and I never stopped him from using it. I think terrifying was a little bit dramatic to have at the beginning of a show. Like, there's something terrifying in here, then you go, fuck, it's not really terrifying. The show's bullshit, and you leave. But I was looking at this book, and one interesting thing about this book is there's no text. So you think, well, does there need to be a text? And then you realize, even though you're not looking at paintings, you're just looking at images of paintings, that you can read how big they are. And then you can read what size they are. And then on occasion, you can read a title. And some titles are very, very simple, like Untitled, or Untitled Shiva Painting. But there were a group of pictures called the Spanish Lesson, and one of them says, La KGB y la envidia el buen tiempo. So certain words are feminine and certain words are masculine. My ex-wife was telling me about this, so I thought it was very interesting. So this says KGB, jealousy, and good weather. And there's some other pictures. One says, Mi vida es una cumbre de mentiras, which means my life is a mountain peak of lies. There's another one here that says El infinito, la porquería y la lotería, which means infinity, the disgusting, and the lottery. Stupidity and the lettuce. Egoism and the rain. Egoism is male. La lluvia, that's female. But sometimes it might just say abstract, shiny painting on it. But when Cy Twombly died, I made some cross paintings for him that wouldn't fit in this house, in this building. I painted them outside in Montauk, and it says, on the day Cy died, lunar dust covered rose bushes. And another one, it's just a cross painting. And on the other one, it says, on the day Cy died, Sunday lunch interrupted by panic. On the day Cy died, sleepwalking limousine. On the day Cy died, cows nibbling on the trim of velvet chairs. Or on the day Cy died, his right arm bent under his head as a pillow. Now, it's not a picture of a guy lying on the floor, but these were taken out of the beginning of Gabriel Garcia's book, The Autumn of the Patriarch. And somehow, I don't know why, I think you put things together, or I do intuitively. There's no reason why I do anything. And there's not a reason for it. It's just, I thought that it made sense in some illogical way or in some poetic way to me. And so what I'm saying is that if you just read the titles, you look at the images, you see the sizes, you could kind of get the gist of somebody's sensibility, maybe.
It's kind of great about Cy, because it's actually, the sort of a few days after I met you at your opening in Zurich in 85 or 86, I took a night train and went to Rome and went to see Cy Twombly, and that was kind of a very incredible meeting, because he basically didn't want to talk about art really with me. He said we have to talk about poetry, and he doesn't understand why the art world isn't connected to the world of poetry anymore. And he said, urgently I would go to a bookshop and make me a list of poetry books, and they're very urgent, I buy them in Italian. And that leads us to the kind of words in your paintings, because we've been reading as words from your paintings. And we've talked about all the materials entering, the found images entering your paintings, but we haven't talked yet about the words. And also in this exhibition here, there are some words in some of the paintings. How did that start? And I think particularly interesting this idea that you're using not only English words, you're using words in Spanish, you're using words in French. And you once mentioned in a conversation with Alex Gartenfield that, and I thought that was really fascinating, that you're interested in sort of going into languages you at the beginning don't know, that it's always like a beginning. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I think that for someone who's Spanish, to read something in Spanish, it's familiar. For someone who doesn't speak Spanish and sees something written in Spanish, it's exotic or foreign. So I think it depends on where you're from, how that particular aspect of your synapses is going to compute, or the information that you're getting. Sometimes things just sound good in, I mean, I made some paintings that said, "Regarde mes pieds plats," which means, look at my flat feet. But I thought it sounded much better in French. There's a painting in the back room that says 15 years old and surrounded by pigs. There's not an image of anything in particular, but I was just thinking about, you know, young fashion models, young girls that are beautiful, and they just walk into these situations and they're just 15 years old and they're surrounded by pigs. And it's a hard thing to live through, grow up through, and fucks people up. Sometimes. Some people live through it and, you know, they're perfectly fine. But there's some days that, you know, where things are kind of rough, and I made 3 paintings. One was called, I was thinking about Marlon Brando in One-Eyed Jacks when he's talking to Dad Longworth, who was played by Carl Malden, and he was his partner in crime before he became the sheriff in this town. And it says, "You're a one-eyed Jack in this town, I've seen your other side." And I was sitting with Jeff Koons at his 50th birthday, and he actually got up and said to everybody in the room, "I love everybody in this room." And I said, "You're crazy, you're insane." I said, "You know, I'm sorry, I know these people too," and it's, you know, and I said, "You know, these people are, most of them are of One-Eyed Jack, I've seen their other side." I made 2 other paintings, it was in 2004. One said, "For get nothing," and "for" was spelled F-O-R-E, get nothing, and the other one is "Je ne rien," not "Je ne regrette rien," it just was "I don't nothing." So that day, I guess, was pretty gray. There are other days where I'm a bit more joyful. But I like those paintings. And even if you're doing something that's dark, there can be joy in it. I was commenting to Hans before, I mean, if you look at this painting, I painted it in 2004, actually in Spain, in a little studio that I had there. And I seem pretty mighty in that one, in my pajamas. I kind of like the way my pajamas are painted also, because you feel like they're silk. If you get up close to them, it's just a bunch of big brush strokes. But it looks like silk when you kind of get back from it. And then there's another painting of me that I painted a few months ago, where I shrunk. Where the maelstrom of whatever my world was just was too damn big, and I just shrunk. And but there was a lot going on in that world or in that space, and basically what I do when I have a difficult time is I paint my way through it. And that's essentially how I've survived this long.
But you've also mentioned that the work often has to do with, particularly in this show here, with autobiographical elements and things which just happened. You told me about the portrait at the beginning. Can you tell us about that?
well, I made a group of paintings, big girl paintings, in 2002. There were 4 that were 13 feet 4 inches by 13 feet by 12 feet 6 inches, which is essentially the same size of the Mao paintings that Andy painted, the big ones. And there was 5 that were 9 by 8 feet and 5 that were 7.5 by 7 feet. And Nikolai always loved those pictures, and he wanted to have a picture in this show like that. And I thought, can I do that? Would I be compromising whatever I did if I made a version of those paintings? And actually, I made 4 paintings this summer that were 12 by 11 feet that were a bit different than the other ones. Instead of this kind of purple attacking this girl from 2, basically it was a painting, I found a painting from 1988 that was painted in probably 1953 by some girl's mom, and I put some purple marks on it. I was actually with Nick Sirota when I found this in a junk shop in Texas, and made a group of pictures called Veramente Bestia that just had found images that had purple marks on them. And then, so that was in 1988. So 14 years later, I made the big girl paintings. And then this summer, I thought, I'd kind of like to see if I could do that, but I want to do it differently. And I made these 4 other pictures. And I had a child with a girl named May. The baby is 10 months old now. And she had a scar on her lip, and I made 4 paintings that had a scar on their lip, and I kind of didn't, no longer it was just these 2 purple marks. There was something that went across the whole canvas, and the shape at the bottom went through it, and they were kind of like maps. I work on maps a lot. So having done that, I felt pretty predisposed to try to make a painting for Nikolai, and I was in Paris and took a canvas from Azzedine Alaïa's boyfriend's studio and painted it brown that night, and then the next night when it was dry, I made that painting. I painted it in the middle of the night. I used to paint in the middle of the night all the time. Then I stopped working at night and I just paint in the daylight. Anyway, so it's a very, very recent picture, and it was also, I usually paint, if I paint figures, I paint people from life. I don't paint from photographs. So that image actually is a photograph of a painting that was already reproduced in some way, so the color was off, and I made it this sort of pink ground instead of a light blue one. And I don't know if that's an interesting story or not.
It's great. Another series is the Shiva series. That's again found images, and it's here in the show. And it kind of reminds of posters from earlier, sort of maybe 20s kind of posters. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I was in a yoga class, and there was this poster of Shiva that was a poster of a painting on the wall. So I asked Eddie Stern, who ran the class, if I could make an image of it, and I then printed it. And it's Shiva, who is the god of everything, and he's all things, and he's a she also, and there's a lot of stuff coming out of him. So I was basically just extrapolating on whatever I found in that image. And I made a group of those paintings, and you know, after Joseph Beuys died, I was talking about him in the film Basquiat, and I remember somebody saying the Chinese calligraphers used to change their name mid-career so they could start over with somebody else. And so I had made a painting on, I found a banner from Coney Island of a 2-headed woman. And so I wrote a bunch of letters on it in 1985. And I had a dealer from Japan who saw this painting, and he said, you know, I can get you backdrops from the Kabuki Theater in Japan. Would you like to paint on those? And I said, of course. And so I ended up with these backdrops, and so they had this ethnographic quality. There was a total other appearance to these things. And for me, you know, one of the things about contemporary art, I mean, artists seem to, particularly at post-war American art, even if the people came from Europe, they'd find an irreducible image, which was their signature, whether Pollock was drawing with skeins of drips or Mark Rothko made a fuzzy shape that was in front of another shape, or Franz Klein made big black marks on a white ground, or Adolf Gottlieb made a dot and some other kind of drawing at the bottom. You could kind of tell whose paintings they were pretty easily, as they were like signs. And I think other artists made things also that once people knew what they did, if that was their style, they would keep doing that. Whether maybe they, I don't know what happened to them. Maybe they only had one idea, or maybe another person wanted another one of those or whatever, but I never felt like I found that for myself. I thought that something could have a similar feeling, but could have a different appearance. So I was very much against the notion of having all my paintings be in the same style or having a look or a brand. And I think that really fucked with people's heads a lot, because I didn't systemically kind of break it down like Gerhard Richter to where, this is alles klar, you know, this is this, that. You know, it was much more of chaotic in it, or flowed in and there was a lot more kind of similarity between, say, the way Sigmar Polke and I worked. And also there was a kind of more of a sense of humor, I think, but maybe I behaved more like a sculptor than a painter, and maybe my films feel more like sculptures than, or they feel like paintings, and maybe my sculptures feel like paintings. My paintings feel like movies. I mean, there's you just need a different tool for whatever job it is that you're going to do. So I think the boundaries between practices kind of get broken down in a way, and as you let necessity become the mother of invention.
There are lots of parallel realities, because we have the paintings here over the last 10 years. However, there was a whole show in Dallas, you showed me before, where you had other works from the last 10 years which are not here. Can you tell us about these parallel realities?
Yeah, it's funny to think about that, because this is a group of pictures really that Nikolai selected. Nikolai and Frank have spent a lot of time pining over works that were particular to them. And I respect that, and wanted to see what they would come up, what their interest would be. And also, for example, if you look in this book, there are hardly any figurative paintings. There's pictures with the big girls, but there's no plate portraits in them. There are no flat portraits in them. In a lot of other books there are. The show in Dallas only had abstract paintings. And it's interesting that here in London we would show figurative paintings, because I think there's a great tradition of figurative art that exists here. And I didn't really think about that before the show, but coming here, hanging it, looking at it, and thinking about the sort of, what's the word, tendency towards figuration, it was interesting to do that here, because I think so much time is spent on the notion of draftsmanship. Can you draw a figure? I mean, I remember my first shows in this country really just looked like hate mail. I mean, I've never been so villainized, hated, or whatever. Around, I guess, in the early 80s. But I think that the show that Norman Rosenthal put on with Nick Sirota and Christos Giacomitti's New Spirit in Painting was a very, very, very important show, very interesting show. And, you know, because it's always hard to look at art when it's around you. I mean, like I said, I was talking with John Richardson recently, who's 90 years old now, who knew Pablo Picasso pretty well. He didn't take those late paintings seriously at all at first. Then he wrote a lot about them, thought a lot about them, because it takes time to see things. And maybe that's why it's interesting to look at, you know, this work of, I mean, 10 years doesn't seem very long to me that I painted this painting 10 years ago. I mean, I pulled a painting out that I made 25 years ago. I put it away for 20 years, and I looked at it 5 years ago, because when I made it, it was driving me crazy. It was painted with, did you see the show at the Correr Museum in Venice, or no?
Yeah, I saw it.
So there are those 3 big paintings that were made about, for the Maison Carrée in Nîmes. But I made one painting, and it had a rabbit on it, and it was dedicated to Captain Beefheart. It was called a carrot is a rabbit to a diamond to a rabbit. And I was also, so it looked like a big chocolate Easter rabbit on one side of it, and had these black lines, and I was throwing a tennis ball at the painting to get the dots on it. But I couldn't look at the damn thing. When I made it, it drove me crazy, and it also made the other paintings look weird. But 20 years later, nothing else was around, pulled it out to see it. I'm going to show it actually in Fort Lauderdale, because there's a show with Picabia and this man Williamson that was at the Williamson Museum in Copenhagen last November, and Bonnie Clearwater, who ran the Museum of Modern Art in Miami, took over that new museum. So it's actually big enough to add some paintings, and that's one of the pictures that I'm going to put in there. But that's one thing if you're making paintings. If you're making a movie, you can't make the movie if somebody, particularly if it's a movie where people put money into it. You can't say, well, I'm going to put it away for 20 years, and then we'll just look at it and see if it's any good. You know, you can't really do that.
Another parallelity of the last 10, 15 years, which became much more present, is obviously your films. There's this publication, 5 films in 15 years. Can you tell us about the film epiphany? How did that happen?
I think it confused the hell out of a lot of people, because they wanted to think, well, he's not painting anymore, and I didn't like that very much. But you know, if you don't cooperate with the system has a way of turning its back on you. And I'm not sorry that I made the movies, because I guess I thought I could afford to do it emotionally, or in terms of my work as an artist, and I guess financially but I never made a movie to make any money. I just wanted to tell the story. And the first, Jean-Michel died, and we knew each other, and somebody came to interview me about him, a Polish filmmaker. There weren't a lot of Polish filmmakers coming over to my studio asking me what I thought about anything, but I thought I'd help him and tell him who to talk to, gave him some money to do some interviews, and then it turned out that a tourist was going to make the movie. He didn't know anything about making paintings, and or Jean-Michel. And I figured it was more of a rescue mission. I just did it because I knew the story. A lot of that stuff happened to us together, and I thought most problems with most movies is people don't know their subject matter. It's one thing to have the talent or the kind of be a journeyman filmmaker where somebody gives you a script, you know how to illustrate it filmically, and that's it. But to me, it was part of my life. So I felt it was a responsibility that I had. So I made this movie about Jean-Michel called Basquiat. And then once I made that film, and what was really cool was that people like Dennis Hopper, Christopher Walken, Gary Oldman, they all loved painting. They liked to paint. And they were in the movie and sort of supported me in that, so they worked for very little. It's funny because we showed the movie in Havana, and we were given all the rights. There was a favored nations thing, so and everybody worked for free, so they thought I was a communist filmmaker. And I showed that a beautiful, intelligent black man couldn't survive in the white art world of the United States. So it was really welcomed at the Havana Film Festival. After making that movie, I came across a documentary about Reinaldo Renas, who wrote a book called Before Night Falls. And once I read that, I thought, and after having made one movie, it wasn't very difficult to do. It seemed as natural as falling off a log, actually, and I could talk to 500 people as easy as I could talk to 2. And I guess other people saw Basquiat and thought I knew how to make a movie, so actors wanted to work with me. And there was an actor that nobody heard of in the United States. He was called Javier Bardem. And he was supposed to play Lázaro. Benicio del Toro was going to play the main character originally, but Hollywood will do different things. Things will happen. As his agent, Rick Yorn and Mike Ovitz, I think they thought it probably wasn't good for him to play a homosexual Cuban writer at the time, and they wanted him to do a bigger movie. He did Way of the Gun. But then after that, he did play a Mexican policeman in Traffic and won an Academy Award. But that was great for him and great for me because Javier Bardem played Reinaldo Renas, and I think people saw what a great actor he was. So making movies, or the practice of doing that, is working with people that can do something that you can't do, and they give you their talent and their faith, and it's your job not to let them fall through the cracks. I don't feel like making movies all the time, and I'm not going to make another movie for a while because I just feel like painting. But I did write a script about a book called In the Hand of Dante by Nick Tosh, which is a crazy book, and it's about the all. And that's a big statement, being about the all, so I'm not even going to try to describe it to everybody right now because we wouldn't be able to leave here. Here's the microphone.
So that's an unrealized movie.
I've seen it already in my head. I'm in no rush to do it, but I'll do it with Johnny Depp at some moment. He gave me the book, and he will be Nick, and he will be Dante. He plays 2 roles. Guy who was born in Newark, New Jersey. You see, I didn't think I would tell you the story. And to a family of gangsters, and Dante Alighieri, who actually he is, but he doesn't know it. And eventually, the 2 of them become the same person.
Do you have any other unrealized projects? Projects which have been too big to be realized, dreams, utopias, projects which have been censored or forgotten? Or Doris Lessing once told me that there are these projects one doesn't dare to do, that could be self-censored projects. What are your unrealized projects?
I think I could die tomorrow and it'll be fine.
One last question is, Rainer Maria Rilke wrote this lovely book which is an advice to a young poet. There are many young artists here and art students. What would be, in 2014, your advice to a young artist?
Let's see. Asghar, where are you? Can you bring that book up here, please? This is a young artist from Denmark who placed that book in the window of this. I guess he thought I might see it, which I did, since I designed the cover. And I also wrote it it came out in 1987. And there's a little thing that I would say to a young artist. About being a student. Gary and David make me take out the nurse's hat, or listen to everybody and then don't take their advice. I made a painting called Red Cross Painting for Norman Fisher that had on it a nurse's hat made out of plaster. David Diao and another painter, Gary Steffen, came over to my studio and looked at it. Because it seemed extra to them, they both thought I should cut out the nurse's hat. I took their advice and ruined the painting. Thinking about the nurse's hat now, I realize what I learned. Never listen to anybody when it comes to being responsible for your own paintings. It's a mistake for young artists to want to please older ones. They're going to make you take out of your paintings the very things that most characterize them as yours. You might think that someone is really smarter than you are, or wiser, or more experienced, and they may be. But you can't listen to them because nobody knows better than you what you need to do. Most older artists are going to try to get you to conform to the standards that you're out to destroy anyway. That's what I would say.
Thank you so very, very much. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You're adorable.